Shalom World Television is coming to Australia. This is a great gift. It's been gifted to many parts of the world, and now it's our Australian turn to receive it with open arms. I welcome it, I bless it. It's going to really support family life, married life, youth, give us a resource that we know that we need really helping, great help in these areas. May Almighty God bless this new resource coming to our land in the name of the Father, the Son and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Shalom World, God's own channel.
It's with great pleasure that I invite to the stage Brian Sullivan. Welcome, Brian. Brian has a doctorate in psychology.
I was going to start by downplaying my story and saying it wasn't very earth-shattering and it's just an ordinary story. But you know what? After Peter Gabor's introduction last night and throwing away those CD collections, I looked at my story and I thought, no, it's a damn good story. And it's a story like every man who spoke last night, a human story connected with God. And when that happens, that's always a good story. This is a story where, as I was reflecting on my life, it was as if I was trying to answer three questions. And you might be familiar with the two questions at the start there. Who are you, God? Who am I? That was a prayer of St. Francis, and his friars heard him pray this over and over and over again. And I guess that's what I'm trying to answer in my talk today. The third question, what am I doing here, is a question that God asked Elijah when he came out of the cave on Mount Horeb. And the fire passed and the storm passed and God was in the sheer sound of silence. And after the silence, God asked him the question, what are you still doing here? So that's the answer, that's the question I want to answer today with my talk. Before I get into it, I just want to preface it that there are three prepositions that are very, very important to me. And I think as a Catholic, maybe they should be important to you too. They come from the doxology, the last part of the Eucharistic prayer, where the priest raises the host and the chalice, and he says, through him, with him, and in him. Those three words, through, with, and in, for me, encapsulate what a sacrament is. And not just the seven sacraments, but the whole sacramentality of creation. So, through him, with him, and in him, Jesus, yes, but also through my life, with my life, in my life, through this world, in this world, and with this world, God comes. God is present. And I guess in my story, it's through my sin and my failure, in my sin and my failure, with my sin and my failure, God is there too. I'm the only son in our family. I have 5 sisters, 3 older, 2 younger. I was the golden-haired boy. And yes, I know what you're thinking. I did have hair once. I was born to a loving mother and a father, true blue Catholics. Dad was one of the good guys involved in his parish, involved with his family, a prankster, full of fun and faith. This happened 53 years ago, and I'm still tearing up. He died of cancer when I was 8. The last time I saw him, he was in bed. He'd come home from hospital. I didn't recognise him. He was like a leathery skeleton, so weak and scary to my young eyes. It was my birthday around that time. He gave me a rugby league football, and I left the room quickly, frightened and lost. Within days, he was dead. I didn't get the chance to say goodbye. And I learned of his death through my cousin, who was my age at the time, who said, "I've got a secret." And I pestered him to tell me the secret. And the secret was, Dad was dead. My world changed that day. I think all of us have an assumptive world, where the world is benevolent and safe, where the world has meaning, and that we are worthy. So my assumptive world changed. I know my world no longer felt safe. My world no longer made sense. And I certainly didn't feel worthy. The world was now random and cruel. And I felt less than others. I felt inadequate, strangely. My father died, and I feel less than other people because of that. And I remember not long after Dad died, that was in Nambour, Mum moved the 6 of us and her to Brisbane. I started at this school, and I remember very early on in my time at the school, the teacher went around the classroom and asked each of the boys at the school what their fathers did. I was at the front, and he started from the back. So I was going to be the last boy who got to say. I remember I was in a cold sweat, waiting for my turn, thoughts racing through my head about whether I lied and told them what Dad did when he was alive, or do I tell the truth? When it came to my turn, I stood up and I said, "My dad's dead." And to say that out loud in front of your peers as an 8 or 9-year-old, after I'd heard the litany of jobs that the proud boys had of their own fathers, just reinforced that I was different now. And it made me again feel inadequate and less than everyone else. And that sense of being less than and less than adequate is a burden I carry and battle with still to this day. The feeling that I wasn't worthy is still with me. And since then, I've sold myself short, put myself down, doubted myself, thought negatively about myself, and notice how this is all about myself. After Dad died, I didn't have any male mentor or role model, really. The men in my family were largely war casualties, life casualties, emotionally distant, often drunk, depressed, dangerous, or dead. They were dealing with their traumas and their demons and didn't have a lot of time for me. Alcohol was more often than not their medication, their analgesic, their painkiller. So I grew up with very strong, resilient women. They had to be because they were left stranded by their men so often. Someone had to stand up and keep the show going. The Italian author, Umberto Eco, said this: "I believe that what we become depends on what our fathers teach us at odd moments." So I didn't have a dad to get those scraps of wisdom. So my experience of men wasn't that great when I was growing up until I began life at Iona College as a 10-year-old. At my new school, which was back in the late 60s, most of my teachers were priests. And that was a godsend, literally. These men were alive, they were compassionate, they were athletic, they were young, they were fun, they were human, and they loved God. They cared about us boys, and my experience of school in the 60s and 70s was positive, productive, and life-changing. I ended up the captain of the rugby league team and school captain, and I ended up joining them after 18 months of uni. So impressed was I with these men, I didn't want to leave them when school was over. So in 1982, I was ordained a priest, an oblate of Mary Immaculate. Somewhat burnt out and emotionally spent, I left the priesthood in the early 90s, and I received a dispensation from the church in 1993. When I told my superior that I was struggling with my vocation and was desperately lonely, and that I felt I was playing a role and my heart wasn't in this anymore, and that I needed to take time off and was contemplating leaving, he said to me, "You wouldn't have the balls." I ended up driving fruit trucks to market. I also was a swimming coach at Chandler for a period of time before deciding completely that I was going to leave permanently. My first job was at a facility for young offenders. The first day, a fight broke out in the classroom. I had 5 boys. Remember, as a priest, I'd been a teacher, and I had 30 boys in a middle-class school in Melbourne. Here in Queensland, I had 5 boys, but these were 5 very, very special boys, kicked out of every other school in Queensland. It was a very difficult time for me, though, and I struggled with the feeling that I was of no further use. And my beautiful mum, who died 2 years ago, told me that it would have been easier for her if I had told her I was dying of cancer than that I was leaving the priesthood. I understood what she meant completely, because I felt that way. It would have been easier. It was easier to join for me than it was to leave. It was like living in limbo. I felt like I was neither fish nor flesh. I didn't know where I fit anymore. I certainly felt like a fringe dweller in the church. I thought I knew what a leper felt like in Jesus' time. I remember at one point gathering all the homilies of 10 years of priesthood and thinking that these were of no further use, and that extended to me, of no further use. It was a real pity party, and with an invitation list of one, me. I began a relationship with a woman. I think I was in love with the idea of being in love. I wasn't really in love with her. So it was doomed to fail, and it did fail, and I thank God for that failure, and I think she does too. But at the time, I'd failed priesthood. I felt I'd failed at a relationship. I was a loser with a capital L. Job had nothing on me. I began to look at life in the rear vision, focused on the past, and I was carrying those burdens from the past. Long story short, I reached the point where I thought, I've got 2 options here. My life will get better one day, or this is day 1. I may have left the priesthood, but I hadn't left the church. The church may not be comfortable with me anymore, but I knew God hadn't left me. He was silent for that time, but I never equated silence with absence. So I left Australia and pursued study overseas. And I studied for my doctorate. So I ended up heading to the USA to do my PhD in counselling and mental health. That was in 1997, and I began my doctoral studies in August of that year. There were students there, international students in this program from Nigeria, India, China, Bulgaria, Italy, and me from Australia. I was introduced to everyone. This was very early on in the program, and the head of department told the gathered academic assembly, that I was looking for a place to stay. So the room was filled with about 30 or 40 people, professors and new students for the doctorate. And out of the blue, I started talking with this Italian student, vivacious, red-blooded, live wire. So in the midst of the conversation, she said to me in broken English, "Do you want to sleep with me?" I said, "Excuse me?" It was one of those moments awkward moments when the room goes quiet. So because I said, "Excuse me," she raised the volume. "Do you want to sleep with me?" By this stage, everyone is looking at me. I was stunned, embarrassed, quietly chuffed. How do I handle this? While I was standing there looking like a complete idiot, Elisa, her name, explained to me that she had a 2-bedroom apartment and there was a space there if I needed to stay for a while. Her English was not good. She didn't mean what I thought she meant. The students and other professors erupted in laughter, but I had the last laugh. 1 year later, Elisa and I were engaged in Assisi, in Italy, and in 2000 we were married in Rome in her parish church. And I still have the privilege, honour and joy of sleeping with her every night. I'm still making up for those 15 years of celibacy. And I'm not knocking celibacy by any means. Soon we had 2 children, a boy and a girl. When I left America, I had all my theories and no children. Soon, with 2 children, I had no theories. After finishing my studies, we returned to Australia and I began an academic career right here at UQ that lasted about 12 years. It was during my time here that I attended a menALIVE event. And after that, I spoke with Robert and the team to come and do a parish event at my home parish. That sowed something in me where I wanted to get into God talk again. I wanted to share my faith. I never lost my faith. I ended up on the board at Iona College, and then the principal, Father Mark Edwards, now Bishop Mark Edwards, said he wanted to interview me for a job teaching religious education back at the college. I saw this as a healing for me in many ways, and an opportunity to once again be on the mission with young men. Well, what an experience back there has been. 5 years back in the classroom, 5 years pastorally caring for boys. And I wanted to give the boys an experience like I had with the priests who taught me. I did something very dangerous though about that time. I signed up for that 30 days Ignatian retreat, and I started listening and reading to Pope Francis. And that was dangerous because that shook me up. And especially Pope Francis, where he said, this church of ours is a field hospital after battle for the wounded. It wasn't a museum for saints. I know he said to priests, be shepherds with the smell of sheep on you. I didn't know it was to priests at the time. I read it quickly and I just saw we need to get the smell of sheep on us. So around that time, I started feeling that I needed to do something different. And I spoke with my principal at Iona and I said, I've got this itch and I think I'm going to have to scratch it. My PhD was the research was on the effectiveness of court-mandated programs for domestic violence offenders. The policeman there from Rockhampton will know something about that, I think. So I was facilitating groups over in America and came back here, and while I was teaching at uni, I was teaching a violence course, how to prevent it, of course, not how to do it. And I ended up doing a lot of training in the sector, training with police, training with probation and parole, training with community organisations in how to work with perpetrators to help rehabilitate them. And I did some training Easter last year, and the woman who asked me to run the training rang me up and said, "Would you come and work for us?" And I said, "Well, what are you offering?" And she said, "Less holidays, less money, and you get to work with violent men." That had the smell of sheep all over it. My principal tried to talk me out of it. He said, "You know, you're 60 now, you've got a young family, you've done the hard yards, you need to focus on building up your super and looking at retirement." Well, that was just the wrong thing to say, because that confirmed me that I needed to do this. I've become downwardly mobile. From church to academia to secondary school to a little non-government organisation where I work with violent men now. Strangely, or not so strangely, men who are emotionally distant, depressed, drunk or drugged, and dangerous, not dead yet. You might remember they were the men I grew up with. I hear harrowing, horrible stories of men's violence to women and children every day. And you pay a price for the stories you hear. I also see frightened, damaged men whose fathers were abusive, addicted, or absent. And you know, as Richard Rohr says, the pain that is not transformed is the pain that is transmitted to others now and down the generations. And most strangely of all, I feel like in some ways, and I don't want to overstate this or make it seem corny, but there are times in my work that I feel I'm actually like a father to these men. I'm the fatherless one. I can't be a father to these guys, but that's what it feels like I'm called to be. I prepare myself every morning, heading down the M1 to Woodridge in my armour-plated Isuzu. I say the rosary, the Jesus prayer. I pray for protection, and I put on my spiritual armour to battle evil, darkness, violence, selfishness and abuse in myself first, then in the men I work with. And read Ephesians 6:10 to 18 if you want more detail about that armour, because we all have it. And I do it for them, but I do it for the women and children in their lives who they have harmed so deeply. Before I left Iona, this was supposed to be a 15-month secondment. I received an email from the principal the other day asking my intentions, and he needs to speak to me. I think I know what I'm going to tell him. I'm not sure he's going to like it. But before I left Iona, I don't know if people here know Breaking Bad. A boy gave me that poster because he thought I looked like Walter White, who was the teacher gone villain in the movie, in the TV show. And in my work, I've met and had the opportunity to work with Rosie Batty, the Australian of the Year from 2015, whose son Luke was brutally killed by her ex-partner. And she said something that she found her voice through Luke's death. And, you know, The people I work with, many of them aren't Christians, probably professing no faith, have shown me that Christ plays in 10,000 places, that he's not just in our church, that he's everywhere. And people, unbeknownst to them, are partaking in that cosmic Christ's work of building the kingdom. And Rosie Batty would be one of those people for me. The pattern that I want to talk about that I've noticed over my 60 years has been order, disorder, then reorder. And Richard Rohr writes about this too, and it fits with my experience very much. And when I look at that, that just takes me to Jesus' pattern of death and resurrection in our lives here and now. And American poet Wendell Berry has a fantastic line, I just love this line, where he says, practice resurrection, practice it now. And that's what I'm doing with this work. I'm scared when I go there, I'll tell you that straight up. These are dangerous, unpredictable men. I have been threatened. But you know what? I think with that armour of God that I put on every morning when I go there, they should be more scared of me, because the power of love will beat the power of abuse and violence every time. So I think that God now, as I look back on this experience, the God who I thought I had deserted by leaving the priesthood never deserted me. I felt that he no longer took delight in me. I know he does. That God has the suspicion of a smile on his face and a wink in his eye when he looks at me, who I am now, what I am doing. I'm starting to believe that he likes and really enjoys what he sees. I wish you the same.
Glory to Jesus Christ. Hello, I'm Father Thomas Loya. When our hearts are filled with the love of God and we see everything through that love, even tragedy and sorrow can be turned to gift, and only through God's love. Please help us to spread that message of love. Support Shalom World TV. No gift is too small, no gift is too large.